Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel, Jackson's Journal. My name is Matthew Jackson, and I'm continuing my series in part 2 of Old Testament Law in Modern Times. And this is part 2. In part 1, I established that in an online discussion that I had with some millennials, one young lady responded to my assertion that, I told people that the Bible is my standard, that's what I live by. And she responded, well, then are you cool stoning your wife if she's not a virgin, charging your wife's rapist for money to marry her, chopping up a woman who was raped all night and mailing her body parts to all the coast of your country? Well, so I'm going to continue on with that, and I'm going to answer these questions. And where I left off in part 1 is I first explained and laid the ground laurels, or laid the foundation for this teaching, that of course Old Testament text was written for a Bronze Age society where it was patriarchal and women had little if any rights and they were regarded as property. And so you got to take that into account. Now, and I also left off talking about the 4 stations or statuses of women back in those times. The lowest station was a slave girl. Then the one above that was a single girl, not married, not betrothed. And then, of course, a betrothed woman and then a married woman. And, of course, within the married women, you have 2 kinds, your free wife, your slave wife. Your slave wives were the concubines. So let me continue on and answer the first question. Charging your daughter's rapist to marry her. So, now the scripture that this young lady was referring to, now this young lady that asked me these questions, she did not actually cite the scripture references that supported those notions. Okay, so I actually had to go and look them up. But the scripture that talks about the daughter's rapist paying the father of the daughter money so he can marry the daughter, that text is found in Deuteronomy 22, 28, and 29. So let's lay down some more groundwork here. If a man wanted to get married back in Old Testament times, and he wanted to marry a free woman, a good woman, he would typically pay the father of the bride, or the father of the bride-to-be, 50 shekels of silver. That was the standard going rate, or what we would call the bride price, 50 shekels of silver. Okay, so if there's a very attractive lady and she's eligible and she's a single free woman, that's what they did. They would pay the father, and then they would be betrothed for a period of time, and then they would get married, and the rest is history. So, if a man forces himself on a single woman, that's the key thing you've got to remember here. The fine that the rapist has to pay to the father only applies to single women. We'll get to what happens to betrothed and married women later. But for single women, yes, the rapist would pay the father 50 shekels of silver. Now, let me give you, let's sit on this 50 shekels of silver thing for just a minute, because we're talking about a substantial amount of money, okay? And if you're wondering how much 50 shekels of silver is, think of it, well, go to 2 Samuel 24:24. This is where David wanted to make a sacrifice. He wanted to buy a threshing floor. And I forgot the guy's name whom he wanted to buy from. It started with A. Aronal or something like that. I don't remember it. But go look it up. 2 Samuel 24:24. And the owner of the threshing floor said, oh, Your Highness, no, 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 no. You don't have to pay me money. I'll just give you the property. And David said, no, I want to pay a fair market value for the property. I don't want to make sacrifices to God in a place that costs me nothing. So David wanted to actually pay him fair market value for the property. And he paid him 50 shekels of silver. Now, that was a sizable piece of real estate that he bought, because that's the same real estate that was used to build the temple on. Okay? The temple is not some small shack. It was a sizable building, a sizable structure. Okay? So that just gives you an idea how much 50 shekels of silver is. It would take a guy several years to work and save up money to have 50 shekels of silver. Okay, so 50 shekels of silver is a substantial amount of money we're talking about here. So you got to figure, if a rapist rapes a woman, she loses her virginity, the father cannot sell his daughter as a bride at premium price of 50 shekels of silver. He has damaged goods. That's the attitude that was then in Old Testament times in a patriarchal society where women had few rights and they were regarded as property. Okay? So the rapist is actually compensating the father for his loss and damaged goods. Now here's the real kicker that a lot of people overlook when they criticize this scriptural text and think that it's so unfair. Not only does the rapist have to pay the father, but if the rapist doesn't have the 50 shekels, guess what? He has to work for the father to pay it off. Okay? And there's another penalty for rape. He cannot divorce the woman he just raped and just now took as his wife. He has no divorce rights. That woman is stuck with him for life. Now, sit on that for a few minutes. Think about this. This is a patriarchal society in the Bronze Age. A man not having the leverage of divorce rights over his wife is a source of embarrassment. No man back in that day and age would ever want to be married to any woman under those conditions. He would be the laughing stock among his friends. They would tease him and harass him, and he would never hear the end of it. That would be like being emasculated. You did not want to be married to a woman with no divorce rights. That woman would own him in a patriarchal society. She could get away with stuff that women that had the threat of divorce against them could not do. Okay? So don't overlook that clause in the scripture in Deuteronomy 22, 28, and 29. It's in there. Go look it up. Okay? So these stipulations are more punitive than you might think for that day and age. Now, if there's a single woman and a man seduces the single woman and she consensually has sex with her seducer, different set of rules. Now, the seducer still has to pay the father of the woman he just had sex with 50 shekels of silver, because that's the standard bride price. However, he does not lose his divorce rights. He still has his rights to divorce. Okay, that's really the only differences. So, and again, if he doesn't have the 50 shekels of silver to pay the father of the bride, then he would have to, more than likely, have to work for the father to work off his 50 shekels of silver. Now there is a precedent for this, because remember, Jacob didn't have money. He wanted Leah. He worked for 7 years to get Leah. And he was thinking he was going to get Rachel, but he didn't get Rachel. He got Leah. And he was a little pissed about that. And then he had to work another 7 years to get Rachel. Finally got Rachel. But yeah, so this is not uncommon for son-in-laws to work for their father-in-laws for their daughter's hand in marriage. That's a common thing. So now, let's move on. Let's talk about betrothed women. If a betrothed woman or a married woman, it doesn't matter. Okay, let me back up just a tad here. About the single woman who has consensual sex with a seducer, and the seducer has to pay 50 shekels of silver, that text and that rule that I just told you about can be found in Exodus 22, 16, and 17. Now, let's move on to the betrothed and married women. And again, married women, it doesn't matter if they're a concubine woman or a free woman. It doesn't matter. The rules are the same. If any women in those two classes that I just outlined for you have consensual sex with a man that is not their husband, the scriptures say that both shall be stoned. That's in Deuteronomy 22. For the betrothed, it's in 23 through 24. For the married, it's Deuteronomy 22, 22. Now, if a rapist forcefully forces himself on a betrothed or a married woman, concubine or free, it doesn't matter, the rapist will be put to death. He will be stoned. There is no 50 shekels of silver here. There is no loss of divorce rights here. He's toast. Okay? So he will receive the death penalty. So the death penalty for rape was only given in the event that a married or betrothed woman was raped. So that text can be found in Deuteronomy 22, 25 through 27. Now, there is one text that talks about a man who has consensual sex with a slave girl. A slave girl who's had an arrangement to be married off as a concubine to somebody else, but the deal hasn't gone through because she hasn't been ransomed yet, but there's a planning stage there. Okay, so if that slave girl has consensual sex with her seducer, now that seducer could be the owner of the slave girl or it could be another guy. It really doesn't matter. Even though the text itself doesn't stipulate whether it's the owner of the slave or another guy, the rule's pretty much the same, and he would have to do a guilt offering. He would have to take a ram and sacrifice the guilt offering and get remission for his sin. And in the text, this text can be found in Leviticus 19, 20 through 22. Now, in that text, it actually puts the onus on the man, the seducer, and it's his sin that's being atoned for by making the blood offering of one ram. Okay, so the text doesn't hold the slave girl culpable because the slave girl hasn't been freed. That's the key thing. So that's basically it. That answers question number 2. So I'm going to go ahead and quit now. And in part 3, I'm going to talk about the stoning of a wife who's not a virgin. Because in today's times, that's considered, wow, that's really radical. But I'm going to unpack all that in the next video, part 3. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and also feel free to subscribe to my channel and to watch some of my other teaching videos. Thank you for watching.